Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Okay, welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 141. I have Jeffrey Tucker, who is the head of the Brownstone Institute, and he is a longtime libertarian writer, journalist, promoter, publisher. He's done worn a lot of hats and worked with a lot of great organizations. How are you, Jeffrey?
I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah. I always like to start off with this. How did you become a libertarian? How did you end up where you are now?
Well, when I was in college, I got interested in ideas and then bumped into a book on the history of the Weimar inflationary disaster. And to me, that was just a great window into what's wonderful about economics. And so one thing that led to another. So I really threw myself into the work of Ludwig von Mises, whom I really respected a lot, and then got to know later Murray Rothbard, and we were pretty good friends for 10 years before he died. So that became a really formative body of thought in my life, and I fell in love with the idea of human liberty, generally speaking. So broadly conceived. So and I've never lost my romantic attachment to the subject. So I've stuck with it my entire life.
Yeah, I can imagine that was a great education too. That start with Rothbard, that probably would have been like 85 to 95, something like that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I know he was working with Liberty for a while, and then he left there, and that was where he went more over to the Mises Institute and started the Rothbard report. But yeah, so yeah.
Well, he didn't really start that. That was Rockwell who started it, but it gave him an outlet to write for, a venue. And so he was always looking for that because he wrote so much. And back in those days, I mean, this is before there was the internet, right? Now we just write whatever and publish it. It's no big deal. But back in those days, you needed a publisher, and he didn't really have a reliable publisher. And he was excited about, I think when you said Liberty Magazine, that was edited by a guy named R.W.
Bradford, yes.
Yeah, and Murray was one of the founding editors. He was really excited about it. But then he started sending content to Bradford, and Bradford would send it back for rewrites or decline the article or something. And Murray's like, wait, I don't, if I wanted that, I would submit to the New York Times. I mean, what publish my stuff. What's wrong with you? So he got annoyed at that, which I understand. I mean, Bradford was a little bit that way. He was a little bit like, I think he undervalued Murray, actually. And I think that annoyed Murray.
Yeah, I wasn't there, so it's hard to say. I mean, yeah, but there was, they used to send out this great mailer that said, Carl Hess and Murray Rothbard and Carl Hess disagree about everything, but we all agree that we love Liberty Magazine. That was I'm really trying to do that here with this show. Yeah. So you've been around, you've known a lot of people. When did you first start to note? You've been the best hero, one of the best heroes on the coronavirus nonsense from day one, really. When did you first start to notice signs of trouble in early 2020?
Oh, in January, because there was a virus coming from China. The Trump administration had engaged in a kind of a trade war against China, and I wondered if they were going to convince Trump that this was another bad import that he had to block through his protectionist measures. So he was already set up for that. Yeah. And I had known, I'd been writing about pandemic planning for the previous 15 years. The first article I wrote about this subject had been in 1986, and I thought, well, I knew they tried to deploy it in 86. It would have been 96. And then they tried again to deploy it in 2003. And then they tried again in 2009, and they couldn't get any traction. But they had already tried to impeach Trump twice, and it didn't work. He was kind of ferocious and resisted two previous attempts. But this one was kind of different, and he's a bit of a germaphobe. and hated China. So it seemed to me he might be being set up. So I wrote my first warning about what could be coming on January 28th. And then everything unfolded exactly as I expected.
Yeah.
But even then, I didn't expect full lockdowns. That was just really more than I really imagined.
And I think by then he had already shut down air travel with China.
Right. So there was already a kind of a presumption that you could use government power to control the microbial kingdom in some way. And that was ridiculous. We know, looking back, of course, that the virus had been in the Americas from certainly since October 2019. So blocking travel from China achieved absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So, and if they're going to if you're going to block travel from China, why not block travel from San Francisco? Why not have universal travel restrictions? I mean, and one thing leads to another. Next thing you know, is social distancing and domestic capacity restrictions and shutdowns. And it's like, once you're going to try to use government to control the ebb and flow of the epidemiological kingdom, there's no limit to it. It really is a prescription for totalitarian control.
And once you discover a virus, you just know when you discover it, you really don't know how long it's been there.
You don't know, and there's a lot you don't know, but you can know the demographics of the impact. And we knew really from, I would say, certainly from the second week of February 2020, that the main impact was on the aged and the infirm, and that it otherwise was for everybody else a kind of a flu of varying severity depending on your immunological profile. So that was a known fact. We also knew that the effects of lockdowns were going to be devastating on people, lead to unemployment and level of social disruption that would have been intolerable. So the only thing you can really do in the case of a virus like this is figure out who's going to be impacted and give them a heads up to maybe stay indoors, or I don't know what. Whatever, or depending on your risk tolerance, like even for the vulnerable groups, even for the most impacted group, let's just say the above 75 years old with multiple comorbidities, even then, the fatality rate was less than 4%. So already, even if you were about to die, you still had a 95% chance of living through getting the coronavirus. So it was all just, it was absurd, really. The hysteria that we flew into. But, we hadn't really had a big disease panic in a very long time in the West, because we had learned over the course of a century that panic was not good for public health. So we never did it. The New York Times was pushing panic, and so and that the New York Times turns out to be basically a deep voice of the deep state. So the deep state was pushing panic. So and why? There's a number of factors. I mean, there's definitely the incentive to get the shot out was a major one, which in turn is connected to the desire for health passports and Chinese-style social surveillance, track and trace, getting us used to having our bodies examined, and approved or disapproved by government. But there was also a political motivation just to drive Trump from office and make sure he didn't win in November. That's why on March 13th, the voting regulations were so heavily liberalized to permit such broad use of mail-in ballots and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of motivations behind the coronavirus caper.
Yeah, there was, and one, but I definitely think though it started in some cases with people on the right, because I know Molyneux put something out in late January. Stefan Molyneux had something about it late January, and then there was, I remember I found this tweet from Ezra Levant of Rebel News on early March, complaining Trudeau hasn't shut down flights yet. It's like, so you had, so while the right might not have been calling for some of these more ridiculous policies, they were still part of the scaremongering.
Oh, for sure. They were scaremongering from late February. And we shouldn't forget that it was Tucker Carlson who played a big role in convincing Trump to lock down. He flew to Mar-a-Lago on March 7th to convey to him the news that the virus was much worse than everybody was saying. And which he says he knew because he got a phone call from somebody who's very well connected in the intelligence community. I think I know who that person was. But Tucker has not spoken about it since. But yeah, the right wing in this country was all about it because it came from China and because of a general apocalyptic mentality. These people are people that think that God is punishing us for our immoral behavior and licentious lifestyles and that sort of thing. And they already had been trained in this sort of outlook because of AIDS, right? Yeah. So they're like, okay, here comes the bad bug to punish humanity in an apocalyptic way. So the right wing was all in. And the right wing among the libertarians were all in too.
Yeah. Well, I would say the right has always been about the boogeyman, whether it be Islamic terrorism or immigrants or whatever. It's always about the boogeyman, in this case, the virus, and, I'm sure you're probably, aware of this wonderful quote from Mencken that I think is certainly worth repeating. The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed, parenthesis, and hence clamorous to be led to safety, parenthesis, by an endless series of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary.
Yeah, and he has a great list after that. The Mormons, the Kaiser.
Yeah. Yeah, so you had this, but I there was also, I think also some cases on people on the left eventually saw this as an opportunity to socially engineer, I happen to know, the Facebook account of somebody who put a petition on change.org. I said, we've got to cancel South by Southwest in Austin. And that happened, I believe, on the 6th of March. And that was really a huge bellwether in my view when that happened. And of course, Austin being a very far left city, which was before it went crazy on the national level. But,
Yeah, that was March 8th that they canceled South by Southwest. And then that was the mayor of Austin made an executive decision to cancel. And at that point, it became pretty clear that a typical mayor, and he wasn't an anybody, it didn't really even matter, for him to make that kind of judgment about a conference that was attracting well over 100,000 people. So he was canceling contracts for 100,000 flights, 100,000 hotels, losing millions, billions, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for the city. And for him to do that on his own, he was not acting on his own. What he was doing was warming up the country for generalized lockdown. So he was definitely, in that case, he was acting as a deep state actor just to get people used to the idea of executive dictatorship.
Yeah, that was interesting. There were two really great events in Austin that were a casualty of all this. You probably were aware of them. Number one was that event called Voice and Exit that later got called Future Frontiers. That was Max Borders and Seth Bluestein. They used to, or Blaustein, and then there was that other, and then there was another event in Austin called Paleo FX, which was just this entire alternative health event that they get people like Dave Asprey, Ben Greenfield, but they'd also talk about psychedelics. They'd talk about stem cells. They'd talk about alternatives to big pharma. I mean, the guy who started said, we're taking on big pharma and big ag. And of course, that event is also a casualty of all this. I don't know if either of them are ever coming back. So, this is really the question I'm asking myself, Jeffrey, is, there were a few people pushing back. I remember on March 13th, there was that great article from Heather McDonald, where she said, compared to what? You're probably familiar with that article, right?
I don't remember that. March 13th, huh?
Yeah, Heather McDonald on New Criterion, and she just said on our
fascinating.
Yeah, that was a good article. But other than that, there was so little pushback, and I'm just wondering.
Yeah, well, John Ioannidis had a piece out March 16th.
Yeah.
I was writing about it the entire time.
Yeah.
I think Heather McDonald was good, but I didn't remember that March 13th piece. I have to look that up.
Yeah, and also I remember in early, maybe the second last week of February or something, Dr. Drew came out and said, "Stop this scaremongering. You're just scaring people." You know,
Yeah.
Dr. Drew Pinsky. So
yeah, he was a good guy. He's interviewed me many times, but yeah, there was really only a handful of people who were resisting during this period, which depressed me because, you know, I knew that the liberty movement was in trouble already and had already been in a substantial period of decline over the previous 8 years or something. Yeah. But I still believe that there were people out there that would be suspicious of government, that we had these institutions that would stand up, you know, Cato, Mont Pelerin Society, Institute for Humane Studies, Mercatus Institute, and so on and so on. But they all went quiet. And then it got worse. Of course, they all came out for vaccine passports and masking.
Yeah.
And everything. I mean, Reason Magazine ran an entire, you know, attack on me for criticizing masks. So it was depressing to see the libertarians just vanish. You know, very few.
So some of them did vanish. I mean, I think I don't remember anything bad coming out of the Foundation for Economic Education.
Well, they didn't say anything bad, but what they did do was wait 3 weeks before they said anything about the lockdowns. And when they started speaking out was when the governor of Georgia finally said this is too much. He was the very first person to open, and after the governor of Georgia, they're located in Georgia. After the governor said they were going to open up the state, that's when the Foundation for Economic Education got in the business of calling for openness. So they got good, but it's like, so what I can never forget is that there wasn't an immediate reaction. You know, there should have been widespread protests and public outrage, and the press should have been flooded with articles, and it just simply wasn't. And libertarians just basically had nothing to say. It's even worse than that. A lot of libertarians, like Students for Liberty, sent out a communique that said, "We're all going to socially distance. We're asking all of our employees to work from home. To favor liberty is also to favor responsibility, and we're going to be responsible." So they were 100% with the regime priorities. 100%.
Yeah, I do think some libertarians on a private level ignored it. I mean, I know, for example, libertarians in New Hampshire were still going to meetings and stuff.
Yeah, they were the good guys. Yeah, they were the good guys in this.
And of course, South Dakota never went crazy. It was the only state. And and of course, you were with American Institute for Economic Research and Ron Paul and the Mises Institute. They were immediately called.
Yeah, they were good. Now they had a theory that that the reason for the lockdowns was to stop a developing banking crisis. I was never convinced of that theory. I don't think the evidence was there at all. So they kind of attacked it from a circuitous angle, but nonetheless they ended up on the right position.
Well, and they were also asking questions very early, like what is the end game for this? What, you know,
right?
They said there are ulterior motives behind this. This isn't just about, and I don't know really, you know, but you know, I do wonder if these other people that, you know, spoken out against this, and you know, not necessarily libertarian, but I you know, Wired magazine was a disappointment. You know,
oh, they were terrible, and the ACLU was terrible, and all the mainstream media was awful. We didn't know it then, but what had actually happened is that the FBI and the CIA and various offshoots of the National Security Council and the Department of Homeland Security had already put a lot of these organizations on the payroll and had employees embedded in most social media companies, from Twitter 1.0 to Facebook to LinkedIn and Microsoft and so on. So they were already, even from early 2020, on board with this. So it was, well, if there's ever been a conspiracy, this is it. Yeah.
Well, I think most of us were, at least most of us in the libertarian movement, were aware of Facebook's censorship and some other censorship by social media if you go back to that late 2018, Dave, they called it the Great Facebook Purge. Yeah, there definitely was a lot of corruption going on there, though. Where, yeah, and it was unfortunate, but it seemed like and then eventually, when the libertarians didn't go out and take the lead, who ended up taking the lead? It was more these, the Mises Institute, but it was also more these, patriot group types and some of these types,
That's right.
The ones who listen to Alex Jones. I had wondered if Tucker had a role in this, and I'm not really surprised he got suckered. Do you think Tucker really had bad intentions? He just was a useful idiot.
He was a useful idiot. I mean, he got a phone call from somebody with the National Security Council that claimed to have inside knowledge that this is a Chinese bioweapons attack, and it's very flattering when you get a call and somebody swears you to silence over a state secret, and you're on a private line, and whatever. So he bought it, hook, line, and sinker, and so he allowed himself to be used for deep state purposes. And he's not really ever come clean about exactly what happened. I wish that he would be asked more in detail about that, because he has a lot to answer for, actually.
Yeah, and this is the thing. If he came clean about it, would the public say, "Okay, Tucker, we accept your apology," or would the public say, "I hate you. Don't ever speak to us again"?
No, they would appreciate his forthrightness and his honesty, but it's a lot better than just pretending like it never happened. I mean, come on.
That's what a lot of this is. It's I think a lot of it's going to be like this. Everybody's going to pretend they were never for it, and we're never really going to know who really was standing against it. I know I took screenshots of my old Facebook posts and put them on a Substack, just so I had them all there. Mm-hmm. Here are my credentials. Here's what I said about it. It
was hard for us to find each other too, because after the general lockdowns, we couldn't go to events together. We couldn't even hold parties in our home. Everybody was scared, and then the mask came along, and you can't have any kind of serious social organizing with masks on. So it was all designed to prevent us from finding each other, and most of my feed went silent, which disappointed me. It took a long time to find other people who were against the lockdowns.
One faction I forgot to. Almost everybody in the anarcho-polko crowd came out against this. I mean,
that's good.
Larkin Rose posted a bunch of stuff. He said this was nuts.
Good.
He's
a good guy.
Yeah. Larkin Rose called this a scam from day one, and never. And Larkin never relented, and he's pretty relentless, But And to his credit, Kokesh also there were people. Oh, Adam Kokesh is having this event, and so what? Interesting left too, and not a libertarian community, but I've been involved with the Red Pill Men, like Rollo Tomasi, and those guys were all saying this is a scam. They're not really politically active, but I'd say 95% of them were saying it was. It is interesting to see what happened with the Liberty Movement, and I haven't been able to get anybody to talk about it either. I mean.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that there are just so many people in the so-called liberty. The bar of entering into the liberty movement and calling yourself a libertarian was so low that a lot of these people had no knowledge of history, much less infectious disease science or virology or epidemiology, and they were outsmarted, essentially. These are people who think that you can just look at a few memes on Facebook and then go to an event and that makes you a libertarian, So they just didn't have any breadth of understanding, and they weren't prepared for what they confronted, which was, a parade of experts on television. Their natural inclination was to say, oh, well, this is scary. Well, the other thing is that a lot of libertarians sort of live within this sort of professional class space. So they were rewarded by their acquiescence by staying at home and getting lots of stimulus payments. So this is a great life. You just sit at home. You don't have to do anything. You pretend to work. You can light up and smoke weed all day. And then the government sends you thousands of dollars. It's like, what's to complain about? This is a good life.
This is something I've long speculated about, but I suspect that if we had a large private organized labor movement in this country, like, steel workers, coal miners, auto workers, I can imagine if they were as powerful as they were 100 years ago, they would have stood against this because they understand you have to produce in order to live.
Yeah. It's an interesting observation. There was definitely the complete absence of any kind of working class voice during those 3 years. Really, they were just silent, and they were the most exploited.
Yeah,
they're the people that were called essential, forced to go to work, forced to face the virus, forced to be brave. They got pillaged by the inflation. As a result, they were also got the shot mandates, whether it's nurses or pilots or workers on the tarmac at the airports or whatever. They all had to get the shots. So they bore the brunt of the pandemic response, but never were able to have the voice. Part of the problem is that we when we talk about the voice now, we talk about social media. But I'm sorry, a lot of people with real jobs don't have time to be on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm sorry, they've got like stuff to do. So the public debate became very skewed by class identity. So the ruling class had a strong voice, and the working classes had no voice whatsoever.
Well, we've gotten so much more of what they called back in the 90s the new class. I mean, it's this class of people who just go to meetings and push papers, and that's their full-time job.
Yeah,
or most of their full-time job, and they don't really. And I remember Angela McArdle pointed out too that a lot of illegal immigrants wanted to protest against this, but they couldn't because they wanted to go to work and get paid and have their jobs, and
but they would be doxxed.
So, but they would risk getting arrested, so they really didn't go out. I mean, and I don't know anybody. I know if there were anybody out there early, I mean, I know I was, I think it was the third Thursday in April of 2020. I was out at the Capitol lawn protesting. And I think I was the only one out there who just went out and protested because this is wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't out there because I lost my job. I wasn't out there because I knew somebody who lost my job. I just went out there because I don't want to live in a society like this,
Yeah. Yeah, but it should libertarians need to be aware of the class implications of this. The idea that the working classes have no voice in our public square takes us back to sort of ancient world stuff. I mean, it's really, really bad and very dangerous, and yet libertarians don't often think about the implications of that. It's really does matter. Class identity is something we associate. Those kind of analytics are things we associate with Marxism, but they really do matter for liberty generally. The lockdowns were very much a kind of ruling class scam to exploit the working classes, and we don't know how to say that or even how to think about it, unfortunately.
I think having been a teenager growing up during AIDS hysteria, I think that kind of inoculated me against this, because the AIDS hysteria was so over the top too.
Yeah.
For a long time. I mean, they, back then they would say, for example, the Center for Disease Control, released the 10 leading causes of death last year. And they'd say, number 1 was heart disease. Number 2 was cancer. And then they say, number 12 was AIDS. It's like, well, why are you telling us this? If you're not going to tell us the other ones, it's there seems
right. And back in those days, for a while, they were saying that you can get AIDS from toilet seats and casual contact. That was Anthony Fauci said this.
Yeah.
So he was lying back then, and it's because he had a it was because he had a vaccine ready and he wanted to sell it. You know.
Did you know who Fauci was before all this?
Not so much. That was a little bit. Getting to know him has been one of the real shocks. Yeah, but he turns out to have had a huge role in the past. The AIDS epidemic, he really was the #1 fearmonger on that. But then in 1996, he had predicted that half of humanity was going to die from the avian bird flu. So he's been this kind of disease Eric for a very long time.
And so has, for that matter, Neil Ferguson in England. Yeah, I mean, he might be worse. Yeah,
his whole career is based on whipping up frenzy and using models.
I don't believe. I don't believe that you could ever really call predicting anything a science, whether it be predicting stocks or predicting football games, because the data that you choose is always going to reflect some kind of personal biases that you have and how you can play with data.
I don't think we've learned that by now, but I'm not sure we have learned it. But that is the #1 lesson we can take away from this: the way science is used to lie to you.
Well, the way that you can use charts and graphs or use statistics, or it's or just use these numbers, and I don't know. And in the liberty movement, you said you saw some things that maybe it was, but I didn't really see it that much until. But I think we all were shocked, not affiliated with any think tank, but Penn Jillette was a huge disappointment.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the worst.
Yeah.
But there were many people associated with Cato who were just as bad, and it wasn't just in the U.S. I mean, around the world, the Institute for Economic Affairs in the UK is supposed to be the voice of liberty there, but they were the worst lockdowners. I mean, they denounced Boris Johnson for wanting to open up and that sort of thing. They were absolutely dreadful, and even now they've yet to apologize for it. I just got a communique from them yesterday, and they're bragging about the great contributions of their senior fellow Sam Bowman. Well, Sam Bowman was one of the worst lockdowners in the English-speaking world. I mean, he just couldn't shut up.
And as bad as it was in the English-speaking world, it was even worse in other places.
It was really bad in Spain and Italy, and other Commonwealth countries. Australia was awful, and then New Zealand we know about. That was one of the worst cases in the world. And now the dictatress of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, has 2 faculty appointments at Harvard University.
Yes. And Peru and Argentina were really bad. I know there's that. I don't know if you've seen that movie called Battleground Melbourne. It mostly indicts Dan.
No. Oh, he's a communist.
Yeah, it was the premier of Victoria, not Australia, but Victoria and some other. Modi in India was absolutely horrible. I know a guy who would post for when that all started, he'd post like Hunger Games Day 1, Hunger Games Day 2. He posted about all this.
Yeah.
Because they just shut down the transportation, shut down everything. It was.
Yeah. Hunger Games is a good analogy. It does apply.
It was horrible what happened in India, really. And these are some places where you just can't afford to shut down the economy at all. I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
one of the places that never shut down, of all places in the world, was Nicaragua. They have Daniel Ortega as their dictator, communist.
Yeah.
But he just said, "Look, we're not going to shut down. My people are too poor for that." So
really, in a way, a true working class communist, if there is one. A guy who understood though that we can't just shut down the economy. I've heard, Sweden was good. South Dakota. I've heard that Uruguay was very good in South America, and I've also heard that Latvia was pretty good.
I've not heard that. There was Tanzania was
Tanzania was very good.
But then the guy who refused to shut down Tanzania then later got assassinated. So it was, there were about 5 states in the world that didn't shut down.
And
so,
and it varied state by state too. But Americans were always able to go to Mexico.
Yeah. Well, Mexico's enjoyed a huge influx of expats since then, because there was nowhere to travel. So a lot of Americans just went to Mexico, and they found out that they loved it there.
Yeah.
And they could live a good life for half as much as it costs the U.S. So they just stayed. And a lot of Americans live in Mexico today because of that. So they pretended to shut down, but mostly everything went on as normal. Mexico is always open.
Yeah, other than there's a lot of mask wearing, but Mexico. I went down to Mexico in September 2020 and had very few issues going there. That's
interesting. Did you go to Acapulco? Was that?
This was in September 2020. This was Guadalajara.
Okay.
Because Acapulco happened in February before all this madness happened.
I see.
Is also interesting too is Acapulco had one speaker there who I've known and who certainly got me more interested in South American politics, who went absolutely crazy after COVID. And he said, no, I don't think I'll go back there. And I even said to them, you don't want this guy back. But anyway, it was really, I'm not really, and the Atlas Society and Richard, I think that was why Richard Salzman broke from the Ayn Rand Institute, was because of over the COVID stuff.
That may be. Atlas Society under the leadership of Jennifer Grossman was always very good on COVID. So I would say just Free the People with Matt and Terry Kibbe was good. Atlas Society, Mises Institute, fee late but still good, and that's about it.
Yeah. Was there anything coming out of this? I know they're pretty small. Nothing came out of the statewide think tanks.
No, there's one in Maine that was pretty good. But for the most part, they were terrible. The so-called State Policy Network was awful. Yeah.
I don't know how much influence they have, but there's a.
And the Mont Pelerin Society was terrible. That's the Global Liberty Organization. They had nothing to say.
Yeah.
Mark Skousen pleaded with Mont Pelerin Society to have something to say about it. They had nothing to say. Nothing.
I'm glad Skousen. And by the way, how much money did the Skousens lose on Freedom Fest?
Yeah, I don't know what happened that year. I didn't go. I haven't been since.
But
mostly out of disgust for the liberty movement in general. So,
but
I know they attempted to hold something, and then the next year they held a conference in South Dakota, which apparently went really well. But I don't know how much. I don't know how that thing makes money anyway. But
you bring in that money though and lose that money. It's just it's very hard to run cons, and there's just so many things that could go wrong. It's you got to make reservations, make down payments, and all this stuff. And I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what I'm glad to hear he pled with them. I'm curious to know who was against that. It's kind of sad, but I'm not really shocked. I don't know what. What seems to be going on here, I've noticed, is a split between utilitarians and moralists.
Could be. But, that's a funny thing about that. And maybe you're right. But the problem was that the lockdowns were never utilitarian. I mean,
they weren't utilitarian, but they thought they might be utilitarian. And they've always kind of said, you have to have this attitude. I don't care if it works or not. It's a violent and sadistic policy, which it is.
All my friends were. I developed a whole range of scientist friends who were offended by Fauci pretending to be. So I kind of lost all interest in libertarians at some point. By the fall, I was like, okay, people suck. So I linked up with a scientific community that was that kind of blended a little bit of moralizing with utilitarian considerations and scientific ones, and came up with a pretty good response in the Great Barrington Declaration. and that out of which Brownstone was founded.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think libertarians need to ask themselves, how is it that the ideology did not provide a good bulwark against the worst imposition of totalitarianism in our lifetime? And you could say it was a lack of courage, a lack of knowledge. But I'm just not sure about that. I think I don't really have a firm answer to this, but like one of the people who's been absolutely dreadful on the whole topic is Walter Block, who's a leading student of Murray Rothbard.
Yeah,
always proclaims himself to be this great anarchist or whatever. But when infectious disease came along, as if it's not already here, I mean, whatever, he lost his mind and said, sneezing on somebody is an act of aggression, so it's the state's job to stop that. He even went so far as to celebrate the state of New York's actions against 100 years ago against so-called Typhoid Mary, and she was in isolation for 30 years of her life. And Walter Block said that was the right response. So, if Walter Block can't get it right, I don't know what to say.
Yeah, I don't know what to say either. And he was the only one Mises affiliated who did that. Sometimes for some of these people, I may attribute it to old age. I mean,
maybe.
I mean, as great as L. Neil Smith always was, why did he go all in for Trump in 2016?
Yeah.
I mean, and he was always great on so many issues. It was so weird to watch that happen. But anybody else you think that needs to be anybody else you think that was really great that we haven't mentioned yet?
Great?
Yeah. Good.
I think we've mentioned all the great people, and there was Don Bedreau at George Mason University. He's a good guy.
Yeah. Tom Woods has certainly put out good stuff.
Tom Woods was weak initially, but then he became better over time.
He's gotten really good. Yeah.
Yeah. But some of the people who were terrible, one of the worst ones of all people was Robert Higgs. Okay. So Robert Higgs, the author of the great treatise against Crisis and Leviathan, was buying into the worst of COVID propaganda for a good part of 2020, and broadcasting that out on his Facebook and denouncing those of us who were warning about the impacts of this on the fate of human liberty. So I don't really know. I'm not sure why it is that some people were right and some people were wrong. It's mysterious to me. Of all people, Robert Higgs would have known. I mean, as I say, Deirdre McCloskey was another person, right? I mean, she's written a 3-volume history of the rise of prosperity and the importance of bourgeois values and all this kind of stuff. She threw herself entirely into lockdowns and masking and the vaccine. Noam Chomsky, another one, who was all about vaccine mandates and favored segregation of the cities by vaccine status. So a lot of shocks. Yeah,
I'm somewhat sympathetic to anybody who's over 75. Maybe they were legitimately scared, but
but I mean, you can't. I mean, even if you're over 75, I don't think that's an excuse because okay, you're scared, stay at home, but don't destroy society. What's wrong?
Yeah, it really is. There have been a lot of. I think the mood of the liberty movement has really changed. I mean, before there was a lot of libertarians would say, well, everybody's a libertarian, they just don't know it yet. Now there's this attitude of everybody's authoritarian, they just don't know it yet. There's really I think it's leading to the growth of this. It used to be, let's try to educate them, and now let's get away from them.
Yeah.
Whether it be the Free State Project, Monte Libero, which is basically a free state project in Montenegro, or things like freedom cells, which are just, agorism and stuff like that. There's a lot of more and more libertarians who are just saying, the heck with this. I'll just go somewhere else and try to get away from you people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's effective or not, but
well, libertarianism definitely failed, and I'm not sure I understand entirely why, but something's missing.
Yeah.
And so I understand why people are sad about the state of the so-called movement, which doesn't exist anymore, actually. But it's also good for people who care about human liberty to have a more realistic understanding of the attitudes on the street. Instead of just thinking everybody's really a libertarian, probably better to recognize the dangers of mass formation and mob psychology and the way the deep state manipulates people. I think this is maybe a good teaching moment. That certainly has been for me.
And that certainly is where, and we saw all of this play out in the Libertarian Party, which I think really is just, I think most of the people in the Libertarian Party just follow whatever think tank they're used to reading. But this is where all those people come together, and it's like, oh, this ends up being a huge battle, and Jeff Neal, who was chair from 2012 to 2014 and has been involved with the LP since the 80s, he said to me on 3 separate occasions, the Reno reset doesn't happen if we respond to COVID, with a more angry tone.
I don't understand. What do you mean?
He said the LP's lack of response to the coronavirus nonsense is what caused the Reno reset. He's one of the few who's been willing to say that.
Yeah, no, but that's certainly true. I mean, 2020 came and went with the main presidential pick having had almost nothing to say about the lockdowns at all. Every time I heard her in the spring and summer of 2020, she was talking about like how we need to get troops out of Japan. Yeah, we need to get troops out of Japan, but I can't go see my mother, and because of the travel restrictions. Yeah. So I mean, they were completely useless on that, and they could have done electorally. They should have made it the central issue of the campaign. They didn't even talk about it.
Yeah, I would have. I heard her talk for an hour, and she talked about it for 5 minutes. As Dave Smith likes to say, if you'd shown up at her speech from a time machine, you wouldn't have known if it was 2020 or 1996.
Yeah,
which is when she ran for vice president, because the messaging was just the same. And I had, we had our own case where the LP didn't want to get involved with an event here after paying for it because, we saw too many people not wearing masks. It's like, oh, geez.
Oh, wow.
I don't know why so many of these rallies ended up Trump rallies. I thought that was really weird.
I don't know. Trump taps into a certain. I mean, Trump had already invaded the liberty world from 2016. I did everything I could to stop it, but it wasn't stoppable. There's this weird tendency of libertarians to drift left and drift right.
Yeah.
And it allows them to be opened up to manipulation, which they have for a very long time.
Well, maybe they just get tired of losing. I mean, it's
it could be. Yeah,
they want to feel like, and you want to feel like you're doing something that's effective. I think, I think that's why a lot of libertarians, get away from the LP and they go work on a single issue. They might go to a marijuana policy project, and I say, look, if you're still fighting a good fight, go. Good for you. I'm glad you're fighting a good fight. I don't have any resentment toward people who do that. There's a lot of, I told all the people leave, there's a lot of different ways you don't have to be part of the LP to do this. You can do activism a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of different routes you can go. But I do wonder where our movement's going to go from all this.
It's a huge reset for the movement, and I assume it's going to be many, many years before it ever reconstitutes itself, if it ever does, or if it even ever should. I'm not even sure about that.
Yeah, you mentioned also that you've seen these previous resets in the Libertarian Party, like
sure.
What were some of those other ones?
So it's always gone this way. Libertarian Party is a political party that has never been very viable electorally, so it attracts. So there's always been a competition, at least since I've been watching this, since the 80s, between the managers and the ideologues. So the managers take over the party, and they love their meetings, and they love ballot access, and they love platform committees and raising money and all this kind of stuff. And they put together a nice little machinery that functions, and that's basically where we were in 2020. It's where they were in '87. But the problem is that the managers of the party are typically not very ideological. So if you've ever been to a libertarian party gathering, you might be surprised to find that it's kind of all over the place. You never know what, especially the platform committee meetings are like, people have weird platforms that have nothing to do with liberty or libertarianism. Just like, it's all very strange. But nonetheless, it starts functioning really well. But then the ideological edge gets filed off, and then that annoys the ideologues, and they're like, who are these people that are running this party into the ground? Libertarianism should stand for something. And multiple occasions, I've seen this 3, 4 or more times, the ideologues rally the grassroots of the party to stand up for principle and purge all the managerial class of the party, and then take over, but then don't know how to do anything. They don't know how to get on the ballot. They don't know. They're bored with meetings. They don't know how to raise money because they don't know any rich people. They don't know how to make phone calls. They can't get people to sign up to be members of the party. All they can do is take over the Twitter account or whatever and say edgy things, right? And so then the party loses money, it loses votes, it loses ballot access, and then they pick some ideologue who says something wrong on the one interview that it gets in the political season, and then so the managers gradually take over and say, you people suck, and they put together the machinery again. But then in the course of doing that, they lose sight of all the principles, and it becomes kind of a big mushy nothing, and that annoys the ideologues, and then they take over again. So we see this cycle, and it happens, I would say, about every 6 to 8 years. So right now the ideologues are in control, but then of course donations going down, ballot access is in a panic, membership's declining, and so on and so on. Not because the ideologues are in control, but because the ideologues are not interested in spending their time on the management details of running a political party. So gradually over the next 3 or 4 years, you'll see all the old managers come back again. And by 2028, the same people who were in charge in 2019 will be in charge again. And then that will rally a new generation of ideologues. And then 4 years later, those people will be kicked out. And this, I guarantee you, is the future of the LP forever.
I don't know what to say. It seems like the edge lording has gotten to be at a different level now than it's ever been before. I don't know if I've also realizing too that cool people can get away with a lot more edgy messaging than people who are perceived as nerds.
Yeah, that's probably right.
And Javier Milei is got the cool factor down.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. He looks cool. He sounds cool. He kind of reminds me. It was a lead singer in a rock band. Reminds me of Johnny Cash. But there's nobody like that and I don't know who's like that in the liberty movement who comes off like that. But you can get away with that when you're cool. You can't get away with it when you're a nerd.
Yeah, but there's a lot of pressure on Milei, at least from the point of view of libertarianism, to perform. And we've already, we're getting mixed messages, right? The inauguration just happened, and that's great. Yeah. But he's backed off on a number of things. He didn't fire the head of the central bank. He's re-signed the climate change agreement or whatever. He's not going to withdraw Argentina from that. But then I read this morning that he has one of his first action was to abolish 9 of 21 agencies, which is,
he went from 21 to 9.
Yeah, so that's really important. But you also need to look at the details of this. Was it a consolidation, like old functions rolled into new agencies? if that's what happened, that's not good. If that's not what happened, that is good. So, but you have to look at the details of this. But there's a lot of pressure on this guy, and I guess I would just, one of the problems is that we've tended to look for political saviors within the liberty world, and that's probably not the way things actually change in real life. So I feel like there's, in a way, too much pressure on the guy. My guess is he's going to get rolled by, even putting Argentina on a dollar standard and going to a currency board, in effect, turns over the country's finances to Goldman Sachs. So it's not necessarily. It may stop the inflation, and that could be good, but it's not necessarily where you want to be as a country. So there's a potential there that he'll just be rolled by the international bureaucratic class. But in any case, you shouldn't look to his success as being the whole key.
Oh yeah,
to the future of liberty in the world. That's not fair.
But this might be on, give you tips on how to win an election, and it's funny, he often uses the slogan, "I'm not here to lead sheep, I'm here to wake up the lions." So the lion has become, the mascot of their movement down there.
Yeah.
In America, our mascot is the porcupine.
Yeah.
So maybe we would do better if we had a lion instead of a porcupine.
Yeah, maybe. But I don't know. We're in flux right now, and a lot of people are very confused and lost, and maybe that's good. I tend not to have any regrets. I mean, I feel like the liberty movement massively sucked over lockdowns, and we needed to know that. So we got to find other things to do and other ways to do it. I myself have put together a really strong coalition, left and right, many disciplines. It's not necessarily libertarian in its signaling, but it's emancipationist and it's an intent, and it's been fun for me, intellectually challenging and really great. So, but it's a different flavor, I would say, of libertarianism from what's predominated in the past.
It does seem also that where these organizations are headquartered seem to impact what directions they go in.
That's true.
Because the organizations that, the Beltway Libertarians, I mean, I don't know if it seemed like that was more of a problem than the other ones outside. And I've had a lot of good people in here. I'm really looking more at people than I am at organizations, but it does make me wonder where some of these things went. And
sure.
Just recently we saw that thing with Americans for Prosperity coming out saying, we endorse Nikki Haley. And I texted somebody, said, yeah, you used to work for Americans for Prosperity, right? You still there? He said, no. You want to talk about this? He said, no.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you just don't want to criticize the team, even though you used to be on it.
Sure. Yeah.
And although goodness knows you don't find that in the Libertarian Party. There are these people who quit the Libertarian Party and then they're constantly bashing it.
They have less at stake. This is a big problem within the.
Sometimes I think the Libertarian Party is like a basketball team where they do want to win the game, but everybody on the team is more focused on just being the leading scorer.
Yeah, that very well could be.
I want our team to win, but I also want to make sure that I'm the leading scorer, and I think that plays out in a lot of these.
Very well could. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see who's available or willing to step up as being the front runner in the next round of elections. I don't know.
I've done 141 shows, and I'm just realizing there are a lot of good people out there doing a lot of good things, and people are doing the stuff I don't like aren't really that important.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways to fight the good fights, and whether or not Milei accomplishes anything or not, I think there's a lot to learn just from his election and the popularity and all that stuff. It's
glorious.
Well, yeah,
it was hard, but he worked his ass off, but got elected. So
yeah, awesome. And people next to him say he's solid, so that's important. So that's one positive thing we can come out of this. I mean,
that's right.
Bring out of this. I hope and who knows, and where you might go. So anything else you want to say before we go? You know?
Oh, not necessarily. I mean, just listeners should check out what we're doing at brownstone.org. I feel like we're doing good work, and I'm really happy about having a new institution out there that's fighting the good fight. So
yes, that's brownstone.org. You had a nice little event up in DFW a few weeks ago. I went there and got to see some good people. It was and you always put on that, a lot like Rothbard, you know, the suit and the bow tie. It's
yeah.
Yeah, I gotta say too. You look at David Friedman. I said David Friedman looks so much like Rothbard.
He does.
Related, but they do. I said him. Yeah.
They look very similar.
He looks more like Rothbard than he does like his dad.
That's kind of true. It's kind of true.
Yeah.
It's so good to see you, Chris. And
it's good to see you too. Yeah. Have a good day, Jeff. Please like the channel, subscribe to the video. Check out my novel, Escape from the Village. Check out my Substack. We're out. Thank you, Jeffrey Tucker. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.